Okay, as I mentioned, I would like to shift gears just a little bit, do something perhaps a little bit more active in what might be that lull time after lunch and after our speakers, and really kind of ask everyone to go along with us and think outside the box a little bit and get more specific in regards to how we can enact the kind of change that our speakers have talked about this morning. I am so glad that President Padron said that, and I probably paraphrased, but it was something like, we can't continue to do things the same way. Because I had prepared in my PowerPoint this quote from the education thinker Edward de Bono: "You can't dig a new hole by digging the same one deeper." And so we're just going to really take our shovels and just start digging a little bit of a new hole this afternoon, I hope. And it's really what we're here for the whole day. Now, what I want to do in about the next, I would say about 15 or 20 minutes, is to go over a process for solving problems, enacting change that perhaps some of you have used before, called design thinking. I'd like to give an overview of what this is and where it comes from. I'd like to talk about the way that we are going to use this process here this afternoon, and then I'll give you some examples. And then we're going to send you off. Some of you will stay in here, some will go into our breakout rooms that are surrounding this room, and do some of this design thinking yourself. What is design thinking? How many of you have heard of this process? Have any of you? Just a few of you. This is something that I'm hoping that perhaps can be a takeaway for you that you might want to use in your own organizations, your own institutions in the future if you find it useful. It's a cognitive problem-solving process, not unlike strategic planning that probably many of you have used before. It originates in the minds of inventors like Edison, and hence I put the light bulb there. It was they used an earlier manifestation of it. It really wasn't until recent times that a variety of entities have latched onto this way of solving problems, including the design program at Stanford University. They're kind of one of the largest, I think, users or utilizers of this process. But you might have also heard of the international design firm IDEO in Palo Alto, or based in Palo Alto, and they are really the kind of the keepers of this process right now. But it's spread throughout higher education. University of Minnesota Higher Ed Redesign Initiative is one university right now that is utilizing this. And you're going to have a workbook at your table whenever you get into your small groups. And on the back page of that workbook, you can see some URLs that would get you to these sites if you want to go and get more information about where this process comes from. Design thinking encourages creative consideration of a wide array of innovative, a word we've heard a number of times today, solutions. It can be applied, as I mentioned, to any field, but also higher education, or including higher education. One of the key points for us today that I thought would make this a very effective process for working is that it approaches these challenges that you are facing from the point of view of the end user. Now, the end user can be various in higher education, but today what we really want to focus on is the student as our end user, and to really remember that what we are doing is to support the success of students like some of the ones that we have here today. Design thinking calls for a deep understanding of that user's unmet needs. It asks us to empathize with the challenges that our end user, and here today, we're talking about the student and then beyond, to really empathize with their needs and to find solutions to meet those needs. Design thinking is a mindset that's human-centered and empathic. It begins from deep empathy and understanding of needs and motivations of people. In our cases, our everyday cases in higher ed, students, teachers, parents, staff, administrators. Again, like I said, what we're going to focus on today is the student as the end user. It's collaborative. It absolutely requires collaboration, and that is why we need you to get into small groups and work together today. Several great minds are always stronger when solving a challenge than just one. Design thinking benefits greatly from the views of multiple perspectives and others' creativity bolstering your own. Design thinking is optimistic, and it's not always to be that it's not always easy to be that in higher education. But design thinking is the fundamental belief that we all can create change, no matter how big a problem, how little time, or how small a budget. No matter what constraints exist around you, designing can be an enjoyable process, and I hope that you find this exercise today enjoyable. And finally, design thinking is meant to be experimental. It gives you permission to fail and to learn from those mistakes, because you come up with new ideas, get feedback on them, and then iterate. Of course, today we're going to do a very truncated process in the grander scheme of design thinking, but I hope it gives you a sense of the potential of this process to enact change and to meet challenges and find solutions to problems. In short, design thinking is the confidence that new, better things are possible and that you can make them happen. Design thinking, incidentally, or an earlier manifestation of it, was used to take this, what now looks like a very primitive camera, an earlier flash camera, and create the Polaroid camera, which maybe some of our young people in the room, aren't as familiar with. But design thinking was used to innovate this process. Design thinking kind of thinks of a problem as an opportunity. A problem as an opportunity. This is what the overall design process looks like, and we're not going to be able to do every one of these steps. We'll hone in on a few of them. But if you were going to do, Stanford does days-long workshops to kind of indoctrinate you into this design process, if you want to call it that. And it usually starts with discovery. You have a challenge. How do you approach it? We're going to give you the challenge for today. We're going to give that to you. Ideally, though, if you had the time, what you would do is you would discover collaboratively what exactly the challenge is that you're facing. Then the next step in the overall design process, we're not really going to have time for this today, it takes quite a bit of time, is interpretation. You've learned something, now how do you interpret it? What is its meaning? Then the third step in the design process is what they call ideation. You have a challenge, you see an opportunity, now what do you create as a response to that opportunity? And we're going to spend some time on this idea today. Then comes experimentation. You have an idea, a way to meet that challenge. How do you build it? How can you create prototypes to meet those challenges? And finally, a step that we won't have time today, but I have time to do today, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to think about this later on, is evolution. You've tried something new, now how do you evolve it to continually meet change and to meet, again, the needs of that end user, the student? So that's kind of an idea of what design thinking looks like in general. Let's talk about how we're going to use this today, this process today. And we've gone ahead and we've created a challenge for you, probably comes as no surprise. How can we begin now to prepare to meet the needs of our students in the future? I think it's been mentioned several times that the jobs that our students may have don't even exist now, or possibly might not exist now. So in that respect and in other ways, how do we prepare to meet the needs of our students in the future, like this young man, whose first day of kindergarten was August 13th, 2012. What our process is going to look like before you go off and break off into your groups, and I'll also give you some examples before you go. Your table here or in the breakout room that you've been assigned to has been assigned a college student of 2030. There's 6 different college students that we've kind of made up for you today. And, oh, here's an example of a college student of the future. Anybody recognize this college student? Did I hear Judy Jetson? Anybody? That's actually a college student of 2062, if you know anything about the Jetsons. It was actually, in 1962, designed to be about 100 years in the future, so that would be 2062. But we're going to imagine that Judy Jetson could be a college student of the future, perhaps, an example. Your goal in your groups is to use design thinking to prototype methods for meeting the needs of your student. And you're going to get fairly specific about this. Prototype Use design thinking to prototype methods for meeting the needs of that student. You're going to go through several of these steps, including discovery, which includes identification and visualization. This may be the most important step in this process. I want to emphasize this. What we're going to need you to do, and we only need you to take about 10 minutes to do this, but it is extremely important. We've got 2 steps here. We want you to assign a name to your student. We want you to humanize that student. We can often think of our students as numbers, especially for those of us at large institutions, but we want you to assign a name to that student. And then we want you to take just a few quick moments to create a visual representation of that student. You will find a space in your workbook to create a drawing of your student. And you need to do this quickly. It could be something as simple as a stick figure. Perhaps you have a Rembrandt at your table who can design a beautiful representation of a student. But I cannot emphasize how important this is, although needs to be done quickly for our purposes today, because in this process, remember, it's about empathizing with that end user. We want you to have a name and a visual of the student that you are design thinking for. So I'll come back and I'll talk a little bit more about this. Within this discovery process, you also have inspiration and imagination. We want you to take about 20 minutes after you have a name for your student, you have a visual image of that student. We need one group member to pose as that student, to imagine that they are your named student. So one adventurous member of your group is willing to be that student. Then the group needs to create 6 to 8 questions to ask that student about themselves, to get to know that student more. It can really be anything that you might be curious about. Give that group member who's posing as the student a little time to kind of think up what they envision as their answers. And just in general, get to know your student through that kind of informal Q&A process. As I said, I'll give some examples here in a second. And these steps are outlined in that workbook that we have given you. Then what you want to do for really what is the majority of the time is to do what's called ideation and prototyping. You want to take that student, got your visual image, you've got a little more detail than we've given you in the student scenario, and we want you to come up with ways that you can meet that student's needs. We've got 4 steps here. If you don't get through all 4, that's fine. Our time is limited, but you might be able to. The first one, develop 2 goals an institution of higher education should have to be sure to meet the needs of that student. So we're not really talking about from the perspective of your specific institution if you are at an institution, but just in general, what are 2 goals that that institution of higher ed would need to have to meet the needs of that student? And you'll want to write those down in your book. Then design and briefly describe for each of those methods 2 operational processes, for each of those goals, 2 operational processes and methods to meet each of those goals. So 2 goals, and for each you want to come up with 2 methods. Again, this is outlined in your workbook, so don't worry about really remembering this exactly. Then, step 3, talk amongst yourselves. What type of institution might best meet the needs of your student? What type of institution might best meet those needs? And then the final step, what has to happen for that institution to be able to meet those needs in the next 20 years? What has to happen for that institution that you've identified to be able to meet those needs in the next 20 years? So these are the main 4 questions in this 1-hour aspect of this that you're going to grapple with your small groups. Let me give you just a few examples. I wish I had more time to give you more, but really it's probably best to leave you up to your own imaginative devices. And let's talk about what this process might, just some examples of what you might be doing at your tables. Some of you will have this student. We've created 6 student scenarios. Student number 1 was born in 2012 and will be the first generation in his family with whom he is very close to attend college. He doesn't know what he wants to major in or what he wants to be when he grows up, but his biggest passion is immersion in virtual reality. So you will find a student scenario in your workbook. It could be this one or it could be 5 others. And they're fairly diverse student scenarios. We really want to encourage you to think outside of stereotype thinking about these students if you can, or stereotype notions. But go wherever you want to with it. Now, here's some examples. For instance, if I had this student, a group member might remember that they had read the book Ready Player One, which is, by the way, by an Austen author, which is a book about a young man named Wade in the future who immerses himself in virtual reality. So you might decide collectively to name your student Wade. Maybe someone else recently reread To Kill a Mockingbird and thinks of the character Boo Radley, who is a recluse. And so maybe together you would come up with this name Wade Radley for your student. And then remember, you need to take just a little bit of time to come up with some visual representation for Wade Radley or whoever your student is. Then an interview question that collectively the group might come up with to ask your group member posing as Wade Radley or whoever it is might be, how are you paying for college? Or it might be, where are you from? You can go so many different directions with this. Then, after you have gotten to know your student and you start asking kind of that first question of the final phase about what is a goal, you might think that an institution would need to engage in translation of skills to real-world applications, because perhaps you feel your student has not had much experience doing that. A method for doing that, you might feel that's important for this institution to do, is the creation of a center for experiential learning. You might not get that specific, but that's just an example of something that you might identify might be crucial to meet Wade Radley, or whatever the student's name is, to meet their needs. Then moving on, what type of institution might do that best? In all of the questions that you've asked your student and getting to know that student quickly, you might realize that you feel a regional liberal arts institution is the best one to meet the needs of that student. And then finally, what has to happen at that institution to meet his needs? Need to have more creating bridges between college and community in order to create those experiential, real-world experiences, sorry, that was redundant, for that student. So those are some examples of the types of things that your group might come up with. To wrap up here, kind of very pragmatically, what you're going to need to do when you get into your small groups is select a scribe to record, someone who has legible handwriting, to record your group's work in that workbook. So pick someone who is willing to. Each table has one workbook on the table that's marked with that table number. And you will see that around the room we've got some numbers here that you will be able to go to. But I'll talk about that in just a second. But what you want to pick one scribe who can legibly record the work that you're doing in that workbook that takes you through all of these steps. When you are done, what you want to do is turn in your workbook to my colleague, Dr. Van Davis, who has been the one who has been intrepidly running around with the microphone. He is right back there. So Dr. Davis, can you stand up just to make sure everybody has a chance to see you? You want to turn in your workbook to Dr. Davis, because he's actually, during our last session, is going to be compiling some of these ideas, and hopefully we'll be presenting a few of them to you during our final wrap-up. So whenever you finish, please get those to Dr. Davis, and he will do that. That will also help me in writing the white papers later on to have a record of what your group has done. Then you might have already noticed that on the back of your name badge, you should have a group number and a location there. And they correspond to the fact that our groups 13 through 20 are going to stay here in Salon C, and you can see that we do have the numbers at the table, and so if you have one of those numbers on the back of your name badge, you want to go to that table. And then Salon A and B, D, and E, you'll have a corresponding number. We have very carefully curated these groups to attempt to get a diversity of perspective, be it geographically in the state of Texas, or having someone from out of state, having presidents, students, legislators, a variety of perspectives at each table. So we do appreciate if you go to your table. If by chance you don't have a number, then please just pick one to go to. But what we're going to need to do is, when I kind of give the signal and give the go-ahead, is to those of you who have one of the other salons besides this one, go to it. And they surround the room. You've got Salon A and Salon B over here, so you can just go out the doors in that way. And then we've got Salon D and E over on this other side. And you'll see that there are some tables, each with a number and a workbook, and an extra table in each room. So please take some time to get to your locations and get to work. Thank you.